official building in the world from 1968 until 1993. You'll notice this skyscraper standing all by itself. It's actually the only private skyscraper on the east or the lakeside of that road. See that road over there? DuSable Lakeshore Drive runs down the edge of Lake Michigan. And the whole Chicago lakefront is supposed to be public access, not private developments. It's supposed to be a bunch of beaches and parks. But in the late 60s, they found a zoning loophole that allowed them to build those fancy apartments. They had to be considered part of the river on this side as opposed to part of the lake on the other side. That loophole has since been closed, and this will remain the only private skyscraper on the lakeside of Lakeshore Drive. There's been a lot of rumors over the years about famous people that supposedly had apartments in there, including Tom Cruise, Sammy Sosa, and Halle Berry. Now, I cannot confirm whether or not those rumors are true, because Halle Berry refuses to answer my DMs. Let's talk about the word Chicago. Where does the city get its name? It's originally from a native term, Chicagoa, which roughly translates to stinky onion. That's true. This area was a swamp, smelled like onions. That's what the natives called it. New York is the Big Apple. You could technically call Chicago the Stinky Onion. If you'd been here years before there was ever a city, the Chicago River, what we're on right now, would have looked a lot different. Originally, the Chicago River was only about 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and it flowed into Lake Michigan. Today, the river is about 100 feet wide, 20 feet deep on average, and it flows out of the lake through the city. How did that happen? Well, in the late 1800s, the city was growing a lot. We were all using the river as a sewer. A lot of gross stuff would go into the river and flow out into Lake Michigan. The problem with that, Lake Michigan is where we get our drinking water. It started causing outbreaks of waterborne diseases like cholera. We had to do something about it. So in the late 1800s, we made an ambitious plan to reverse the direction of the entire river. We dug a series of canals to the south and west that would connect to other rivers that connect to the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It took 3 years of planning, 8 years of digging. They moved more dirt than they moved for the Panama Canal. In the year 1900, we completed our project to reverse the direction of the Chicago River. Off to your left, you'll see what looks like a short air control tower. Just to the right of that is what's called the locks, 2 sets of boat doors. It's how we control the flow of water and traffic from Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is on average about 4 feet higher than the Chicago River, and they also closely monitor those locks to make sure no invasive species get in or out. In recent years, Lake Michigan has had an invasive species of zebra mussels. It's a type of mollusk. It's actually been filtering the water, and it's changed the color of Lake Michigan. You know, when we're out by the lake, it's got this lighter blue color. We meet the other branches of the river that have more of a typical river color, a brownish hue to them. The reason this water is so bright is because of that invasive species in Lake Michigan. We're going to go under this first bridge on DuSable Lakeshore Drive. Chicago has a lot of these. We actually have the second most movable bridges of any city in the world, Amsterdam being number 1. And by a movable bridge, I mean they can raise. Most of them are what's called double leaf bridges, meaning both sides can lift up, like the one in front of us. They still do raise the bridges from time to time, mostly in the late spring to allow sailboats to get out to the lake, and they'll do it again in the fall so those sailboats can get back to storage. If you're ever hanging out downtown, you see a group of sailboats just kind of waiting around, they're probably waiting for those bridges to raise. If you get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend it. It's a very impressive sight. It's quite the feat of engineering. We'll talk about how they make the bridges raise later on in the tour, but for now, once we get out from underneath this bridge, this loud bridge, we'll start talking skyscrapers. Did you know skyscrapers are actually designed to sway in the breeze? It's true, you don't want them to be too rigid, we also don't want them to sway too much. So in this tour, I'll tell you about 3 methods of sway reduction, how we calm down skyscrapers swaying in the breeze. The first, if you block the sun with your hands, you look at the tallest out of those 3 towers. On the 83rd and 84th floor, there's a gap. That's called a blow-through floor. The idea is wind can take a shortcut through that gap, take some of the pressure off the tallest part of the building. That blow-through floor was actually not in the earliest designs of the building. Around the time they started construction, they did some more small-scale tests. They realized their math was off. A couple people got fired. And then they just never built floors 83 and 84. Notice all the different shades of blue glass in the St. Regis. 6 different shades of blue meant to imitate how the water and the sky can look different under different light conditions. That blue glass gets darker where the building gets narrower and lighter where the building gets wider. Look at the edge of the building. It's got kind of a wavy shape to it. It's a very unique shape for a skyscraper. Fits with the aquatic motif they have going on. It's luxury apartments on the top. There's a luxury hotel on the bottom. Like I said, they finished the exterior in 2021. But they had a couple of setbacks due to the pandemic and some ownership changes, so that hotel just opened for the first time 2 months ago. Rooms started around $700 a night. If anyone's staying there, let's get in touch. I really want to know what it's like in there. St. Regis, third tallest building in Chicago, tallest building in the world, designed by a woman architect. Ahead on the left, you'll see a silvery building sticking out at an angle. Let's look behind it. In the second row, you'll see a building with wavy white balconies. Aqua Tower from 2009 was designed by Jeannie Gang, same architect that did the St. Regis. The idea is that those wavy white balconies in the second row on your left imitate eroded limestone outcroppings of the Great Lakes area. If you go to Starved Rock State Park, a couple hours west of here, you'll see rock formations look a lot like those balconies. They use GPS positioning to figure out the perfect spot for those balconies to maximize shade and reduce energy costs. And beyond that, in the back row, you'll see a white skyscraper with straight up and down vertical stripes, the Aeon Center, formerly known as Big Stand for Standard Oil. We'll get a great view of that building once we get around this next corner, but I want to tell you a story about the Aeon Center because it's got a bit of a troubled past. When it was completed in 1973, it was the tallest building in Chicago for 1 year, and then they finished the Sears Tower. So that was a bummer. Also, they originally covered the outside of the building with rare Italian marble, the same type of marble Michelangelo had used to make the Statue of David. But that rare marble could not handle Chicago winters. The temperature change made it start to crack and fall off the building, so they had to take it all off and replace it with granite from North Carolina. That process cost half as much as the entire building did in the first place. You'll see it coming into view in a moment here on your left. In the back row, look for the white skyscraper with the straight up and down vertical stripes. I can see it now, the Aeon Center, formerly known as Big Stand. Today, the Aeon Center is the 4th tallest building in Chicago, and formerly the tallest marble-clad building in the world. One of my favorites is coming up on the right. You'll see a building with a round yellow dome, kind of shaped like an onion off in the distance to your right. The Intercontinental Hotel was built by the Shriners. You know, the guys that wear the fez hats. They like Middle Eastern themes. They put a dome on top of what was originally their athletic association. My favorite fact about that building, can you see the little stone tower sticking up behind that yellow dome? That was originally intended as a place to dock your blimp. They thought in the future we'd all be taking a rigid airship to work, Zeppelin. So they made a parking spot for blimps. Unfortunately, a blimp has never parked there. Right after they built that, the Hindenburg disaster happened, an infamous blimp explosion, and blimps got a lot less popular. Straight ahead on the right, this white clock tower is the Wrigley Building. When it was completed in 1924, that was the tallest building in Chicago. It's a style called Spanish Revival. At that time in the early 1920s, American architects were still trying to figure out their own unique sense of style, so we're still copying European styles. Specifically, that clock tower is modeled after a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. So it's an office building made to look like a cathedral. If you're a baseball fan, you might recognize the name Wrigley. Wrigley Field, where the Chicago Cubs play, is named for the same company. This is originally their offices. The Wrigley Company started out as a soap and baking powder company, and one time they did a promotion where they included a free stick of chewing gum with every purchase. The gum was so popular, they just became a chewing gum company. This is the original offices of that Wrigley Company. Today there's a Jared Deli's in there if you're looking for a good ice cream sundae on a hot day like today, as well as a Lou Malnati's deep dish pizza joint in there. If you look along the bottom of the Wrigley Building, it's actually a darker shade of gray. And as you work your way up that clock tower, there's fewer and fewer dark gray pixels. It gets lighter as you go up. That's intentional. The idea is to draw your eye upwards. Remember, this used to be the tallest building in Chicago back in the day. Now, the way they gave it that lovely color graded, getting lighter as you go up, is the outside of the Wrigley Building is actually tiled. You see those tiles? It's covered more than 250,000 enameled terracotta tiles, which gives it that lovely color gradient, getting lighter as you go up. And those tiles also make the Wrigley Building more fireproof. Fire is unfortunately a big part of Chicago's history. We'll talk more about the Great Chicago Fire in 1871 later on in the tour. Sorry, those are my cousins. For now, let's take a look at the second tallest building in Chicago. Straight ahead, the Trump International Hotel and Tower from 2009. Trump Tower is the second tallest building in Chicago. You'll see it has 3 horizontal black strips going across it in places where the building gets narrower. Those are called setbacks, and their height is no coincidence. That first setback is actually the same height as the roof of the Wrigley Building. It's 2009, saying hello to 1924. This is a great example of a modern style called contextualism, as in context. It's a way for buildings to flow with the context around them. In this case, the height of each of those 3 setbacks corresponds to the height of a different older building nearby. Trump Tower was designed by another Chicago architect, Adrian Smith, also known as the world's tallest architect because he designed the current tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. To help picture the tallest building in the world, picture 2 of Trump Tower stacked on top of each other.
That's actually crazy.
About twice the height of Trump Tower. That's about the height of the tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, and and it was designed by the same architect, Adrian Smith, right here in Chicago. Over on the left, you'll see a stone building with short towers on the corners, the central dome in the middle. I love the detail on that dome up top. That is the Jewelers Building from 1926. When it was completed in 1926, that was the tallest building west of New York City. There used to be a lot of jewelry companies in there. In the mid-20s, those were Al Capone's days. A lot of organized crime. So if a jeweler was worried about getting robbed, they did not have to leave their car because the Jewelers Building had an automobile elevator. You can drive your car with your jewelry into the building and take you, your vehicle, and your jewelry up to any of the first 27 floors. Also, have you ever seen Batman Begins? Those corner towers? Batman spent some time brooding in front of one of those in the movie Batman Begins. Let's do one from the 1960s. If you're a fan of the band Wilco, you may recognize these as their album cover. Two of the most photographed buildings on the river. Coming up on the right, you'll see two round, white, corncob-shaped towers, the Marina City Towers, 1968. Their architect Bertrand Goldberg said there are no straight lines or sharp corners in nature, therefore our buildings should have none. And to get this round, natural design. Goldberg's goal was to create a city within a city. You could live in your apartment above, park your car in the garage below, dine in the restaurants below that. There was an ice skating rink, a bowling alley, a laundromat. You could even park your boat in the marina underneath. At the time these were built in the 1960s, the river was still very industrial. There was a lot more factories. It was smelly. Not a lot of people wanted to live right by the river. So since these were some of the first big residential buildings on the river, they had to include anything its residents could possibly want. A city within a city. In fact, these were a success. I'm convinced the city was a good idea to keep cleaning up the river. Rivers got cleaner and cleaner, so they have a ton of apartment buildings on the river. I actually got to go to a New Year's Eve party in one of those towers, and on New Year's, there's barges on the river that shoot off fireworks, so I got to watch fireworks going off while I was above them. Pretty cool. It's probably the best thing I got out of that relationship. Over on the left, that concrete building with the gold 5-5 is 55 West Wacker. It's also from 1968, but a very different style called brutalism. The late 60s were a tumultuous time, and certain businesses and institutions wanted to convey a sense of stability and authority. So they built these heavy fortress-like buildings with exposed concrete and small inset windows. Brutalism came and went pretty quickly in the late 1960s. It's a style you see in a lot of government buildings, university campuses, and libraries. Now for contrast to that, the next one on the left is an elegant glass skyscraper. We're going to follow those white granite columns all the way to the roof. Block the sun with your hands, you'll see the roof looks like an ancient Greek temple. Kind of looks like the Parthenon in Athens, stretched out into a glass skyscraper. This is 77 West Wacker. The style is called neoclassical. It's a new take on classical ancient Greek design. It's pretty cool from a time perspective. We're here in 2023, looking at a building from 1992, which is itself a reference all the way back to ancient Greece. Feel free to take as many pictures as you like. It'll be pretty much non-stop photo ops on a gorgeous day like today. I'll be sure to try to give you a heads up if I see any extra special photo opportunities. Just make sure you're not standing up blocking anybody's view. If you want to stand up and take group photos, we'll give you a nice photo break near the end of the tour. We're back up by Native Pier. We'll take a nice group photo break near the end of the tour. All along beside us on the left here, we have the Chicago River Walk, built in the early 2000s at a cost of $112 million. Each section of the river walk between the various sets of bridges is called a room, and each room has its own unique style and character. The room to our left right now is known as the River Theater, named for those steps like you would have in an ancient amphitheater. It's pretty cool how they have the trees going right down the steps right there. The idea of having a river walk on the Chicago River dates back to 1909, but construction of this river walk did not start until 2006. Part of a long-term plan for the whole city called the Burnham Plan, an architect named Daniel Burnham. That plan is also the reason we have our lovely public access lakefront, all those parks and beaches on the lakefront. We'll talk more about the Burnham Plan later on in the tour. The next wide stone building on the left is called the Builders Building. This one is built in two sections. See if you can spot the difference. The wide section on the left with all the stripy pillars near the bottom is from 1927, and the narrow section on the right with the dark bay windows that protrude out was added on in 1986. It's a nearly 60-year time jump, all within one building. The Builders Building, 1927 and 1986. Now with the Wrigley Building, we were talking about how in the early 1920s, American architects were still trying to figure out their own unique sense of style and beauty. Well, in the late 1920s, the Roaring 20s, they found their own unique American architectural style, and it's called Art Deco. When you hear Art Deco, think Roaring 20s. We'll see a lot of great examples on the tour. Perhaps our best example of Art Deco is this next huge stone building on your right. It's from 1929, and it's called the Merchandise Mart. This Art Deco style is all about optimism in our machine-made future. We get that sense of optimism from all the straight-line columns on the way up, just like we felt we were on the way up. And there's kind of a machine feeling to it, a lot of repetitive patterns, like the arrows and the trail row of statue heads by the river. Those were added in 1953 by Joseph Kennedy, father of former President John F. Kennedy. The Kennedys owned the Merchandise Mart for many years. Those 8 bronze busts are what's called the Merchant Princes, big Chicago businessmen who shaped the city's history and the world of business in general. Guys with names like F.W. Woolworth, A. Montgomery Ward, and Marshall Field, for whom the Field Museum of Natural History is named. We'll talk more about the Merchandise Mart on the way back, how big it is, what they used it for. But for now, eyes up, cameras up. After this bridge, you're going to have one of your best views on the tour. We're approaching the junction of the 3 branches of the Chicago River. A lot of our newest skyscrapers in the last 10 years were built here. If you were here a decade ago, you would have been looking at a lot more parking lots. Today, you're looking at Chicago's trophy case. Welcome to Wolf Point. If I'm in the front of your picture, I'll try to make it look like I was really guiding it up. Right. Now, like I said, this is the junction of the 3 branches of the Chicago River. We're leaving the main branch. We'll do a quick excursion up the north branch, then we'll head way down the south branch and see the Willis Tower on the way back. Straight ahead, this building with the big arch at the bottom is River Point from 2017. I love the reflection in the middle. A lot of gorgeous depth in that reflection. If you look about 2/3 of the way up, you'll see window washers. Pretty cool. Couldn't be me. Scared of heights. River Point from 2017 is a unique foundation because that building's built directly above active Amtrak and Metra train lines. See those circles in the stone wall underneath? Those are actually vents. There's fans spinning in there, letting air out for the trains that run right underneath. River Point from 2017. The newest addition to our skyline is directly to your right, Salesforce Tower. Brand new office building. It's about 95% leased up. They're still putting some finishing touches on it. And to the left of that is Wolf Point West, an apartment building from 2016. Both sit on land owned by the Kennedys. Most of the buildings we'll see today are either apartment or office buildings. An easy trick to tell the difference: if there's any windows cracked open or balconies, that's probably an apartment building. If there are no windows cracked open or balconies, it's probably an office building. Straight ahead, on the left side of the river, the shorter brick peach-colored building is the oldest building we'll talk about on the river today. That is the Fulton House. It's from 1898. This was originally a freezer for the meat packing industry. They would slaughter cattle in stockyards around the city, bring them here to be frozen and shipped off on trains. Then in the 1970s, an architect named Harry Weiss oversaw a redesign and turned it into apartments. They put a bunch of holes into it for windows and balconies. Take a look at those balconies on the far left side. You see the white space on the outside of those balconies? It shows you just how thick the walls of that freezer were. They say when the meatpacking industry moved out in the 1970s, it took the Fulton House 3 months to thaw out. When they hollowed out those 4-foot thick walls, they found they had been insulated with a mixture of cork and horsehair. Straight ahead on the right, this bridge sticking up in the air is the Carroll Street Railroad Bridge. It's from 1908. It's a landmark. It's no longer in use, but it gives us a nice demonstration of how these bridges work. The technical term for these movable bridges is a bascule trunnion bridge. It's a fancy word for seesaw or teeter-totter. On the back, see that big concrete block? That's the counterweight. When the block goes down, the bridge stands up. All 37 of our movable bridges have counterweights. Most of those counterweights are buried out of sight where you can't see them, but the Carroll Street Railroad Bridge is kind enough to demonstrate. This is what's called a single-leaf bridge, just the one side lifted up. Over on the left, these pointy residences are the River Cottages, 1988, designed by Harry Weiss, same architect that redesigned the Fulton House. He was a big fan of triangles and sailing. See, the whole building's kind of shaped like a giant sail. Everyone thought Harry Weiss was crazy for this one, not just for the odd triangular shape of the building, but for the fact he wanted to put residences on the river at all. As recently as 1988, when these were built, the river was still very industrial, especially the North Branch, what we're on now, was smelly. Not a lot of people wanted to live by the river. In the long term, though, Harry Weiss was right. A few years ago, one of those 4 units sold for $2.25 million. The river is now some of the most sought-after real estate in the city. So our Captain Greg is going to do a U-turn here on the North Branch of the Chicago River, so we head down the South Branch. This is a great little break. If you need to use the bathrooms, 4 doors to the back, or visit the bar. We got bottled water, soft drinks, alcohol, chips, pretzels. It is a card-only bar, no cash. My name is Michael. I'll be coming around, make sure everybody can hear me all right. If you have any questions, any recommendations, let me know. I'll be back on the mic after we turn around. Third and 84th floor of the St. Regis. They just announced this next bridge straight ahead, the Lake Street Bridge, is going to be closed in 2024. So that opportunity you just saw to have a train go off the top, won't be able to do that in a few years. You guys are lucky. Up ahead on the right, you'll see a building with a Y-shaped foundation. You see that one pinches together at the bottom? Now, why would you want to build a foundation like that? Well, this is actually a really tricky place to put a skyscraper. They just fit the foundation in between two things. On the one side, there's Amtrak and Metro trains running underneath. On the other side, a city zoning law required them to leave 30 feet of space between the river and the front of the building. So they had to squeeze that foundation into only 20% of the lot space, about as wide as this boat. The first full-size floor of that building is about 100 feet off the ground. How do you do that safely? A lot of concrete. You ever see those rotating concrete trucks? It took about 500 of those to pour the foundation for this building, 150 North Riverside from 2017. You can see some of that concrete on the foundation along the bottom there. It goes way down into the ground. And also, if you look up in the angled glass to your right, you'll see a reflection of our boat. See if you can spot yourself in the reflection up there. Here's where we're talking about our second method of sway reduction. How we calm down skyscrapers swaying in the breeze. You can't see them, but on the top floor of this building to your right, there are 12 tanks holding 160,000 gallons of water. It's called tuned inertial slosh dampers. When the wind makes the building sway one way, all the water in those tanks sloshes the other way because of inertia. And that helps reduce the amount of time it takes the building to settle, which is important because that's an office building, and that can mean the difference between hitting reply and accidentally hitting reply all. Over on the left, this next blue glass building coming up on your left is the Bank of America building from 2021. The Bank of America building is also the headquarters for the Chicago Marathon, which is owned by the Bank of America. This building costs around $800 million to construct. You'll see it's got these lovely blue ridges on the side there that helps shave off the wind step by step. And they also have very reflective glass. It's such a clear view of the sky and its neighbors bouncing off the front face of the Bank of America building. The Bank of America building had to deal with that same city zoning law requiring them to leave 30 feet of space between the river and the front of the building for public access. You can see how they dealt with that with these tripod legs. Those steel I-beams lift the third floor beyond up off the ground so that those three guys can have a smoke. Now, like I said earlier, I called my tour a tour of time. So it's convenient. The next 5 buildings on the right are going to be in chronological order. Let's go through some different phases of Chicago's architectural history. We'll start on the right with 2 North Riverside Plaza. Much like the Merchandise Mart, this is another Art Deco building from 1929. Made of the same material as the Merchandise Mart, this is polished Indiana limestone. This is originally home to the Chicago Daily News. A lot of famous writers worked in this building, including Carl Sandburg and Joseph Pulitzer. If you look at those columns along the bottom of the building, in between the tops of those columns, there are carvings. Those bas-reliefs tell the story of the written word, from the hieroglyph to the Gutenberg printing press. And speaking of hieroglyphs, closer to the river, see those circular white lights with the stone obelisk between them? This is built right around the time they discovered King Tut's tomb, which kicked off a craze in American architecture of including Egyptian elements. That's why you see those stone obelisks by the river. So this is Art Deco, a fancy style from the Roaring '20s. Now, as you might know, at the end of the Roaring '20s, we had the Great Depression and then World War II. It's kind of a gap in the architectural record. We weren't building a lot of new big buildings. So when we emerge in the post-war period, those experiences have changed our mindset. That's how you get a new style. It's called black box modernism. On your right, Gateway 1 from 1965 and Gateway 2 from 1967. Black box modernism is all about simplicity and efficiency. We got rid of the more decorative Art Deco style. Now we're just trying to be as efficient as possible. These are people that had lived through the Great Depression. They did not want to waste anything. The style was pioneered by a German architect, Mies van der Rohe, who led the Bauhaus school in Germany, came here and designed over 40 of Chicago's skyscrapers. Once you start noticing these black box buildings, you'll see them all over town. The most famous example of this style, black box modernism, is also the tallest building in Chicago. You can just see the top corner to your left there, Dave Willis, formerly Sears Tower. We'll get a great view of that on the way back, and I'll talk about it for a long time. Mies van der Rohe actually coined the phrase, less is more, all about keeping it simple. Each of these black box buildings has 3 basic ingredients: skeleton, skin, and space. The skeleton is the steel frame on the inside that does most of the work holding up the building. The skin is the outside. It's what we call a curtain wall, as opposed to a load-bearing wall. Other buildings might have more stone or brick along the outside, bearing the load of the building. In this case, the steel skeleton on the inside does that, so the outside is more of a covering. It's what we call a curtain wall. And the third ingredient is the space. These can be very serious-looking, kind of intimidating buildings. One thing that makes them a little more welcoming is they usually leave space around the outside of the building for a plaza. If you're ever on one of those plazas, look at the grout lines. The lines in the sidewalk often line up exactly with the window frames. So we need Gateway 1 and 2 from the 1960s. This next white box on the right is Gateway 3 from 1971. So now we're moving along in time. We're getting a little bit more decorative. Now it's not just a steel box. Now we cover the outside with this precast sandy concrete. Gateway 3 is built in what's called the international style. The idea they were going for here is you could put this building in any city in the world and it would fit in, which is another way of saying it looks pretty generic. So we need Gateway 1, 2, and 3, as you might be able to guess. This next curving glass building ahead on the right is Gateway 4 from 1983. So now it's the 1980s. We got big hair bands. We're ready to show off again. We got new materials with which to show off. Now we can curve our glass just like the river curves. Great example of contextualism. Also, I just think this is funny. On the right, you got a fitness center right next to a bakery. One is a place I push my body to the limit every morning, and the other one is a fitness center. This next black box building on the left is called 300 South Wacker. Now, we actually did not used to talk about this building very much on the tour. It used to be kind of just another black box building, one of many. That is until a few years ago. The owners of the building spent $800,000 to put a giant map on the side of the building. About halfway up, you'll see a red Lego brick. That's this building. See the shape of the river beside it? The junction of the river up above? It's basically a giant "You Are Here" sign. They put themselves on the map by putting a map on themselves. This is pretty cool. This is a barge. Chicago today, the river is mostly recreational and tourism, but we still have a fair amount of shipping going down the river. One of those barges on average carries about the equivalent of 70 dump trucks worth of material, which is nice because they keep that off of the highways as well. This huge stone building on your right is the old Main Post Office, 1932. At the time of its completion, this was the largest post office in the world. Why did Chicago need such a big post office? Well, it used to be a major hub for mail order catalogs. If you ordered something from a Sears catalog back in the day, there's a good chance it was processed in this building. The post office moved to a smaller facility that's empty for a few years, and in 2016, the developer spent $900 million to turn it into corporate offices. And they also converted the roof of this building into a 3-acre park called the Meadow. There are basketball courts up on that roof, walking trails, pickleball courts, even beekeepers, all on the roof of the old post office. Unfortunately, I don't think that park is open to the public, so if anybody works in that building, let's get in touch. I really want to go up there. Now, this next stretch of the river, as we're heading south, is story time. And the story I'm going to tell you is called The 4 Stars of Chicago. Alternate title, That Time We Accused a Cow of Arson. Now, it's a long story, and to tell it, I need to take a long sip of water. The 4 Stars of Chicago, or That Time We Accused a Cow of Arson. We'll start with the Chicago flag. Here it is. Let's talk about what our city flag means. The 2 blue stripes on the Chicago flag represent the Chicago River and Lake Michigan. The 3 white sections represent the 3 sides of the city: the south side, the west side, and the north side. Of course, there is no east side of Chicago because on the east side you have Lake Michigan. So if somebody ever tells you they're from the east side of Chicago, they might be a duck. The 4 red stars represent significant moments in Chicago's history. The fort, the fire, the fair, the fair. The first star is the fort, Fort Dearborn, the original settlement from the early 1800s. The fort is no longer there, but I'll point out its original site later on. The second star is the fire. We got a time machine? Let's go there now. It's October 8, 1871. The city is dry. We've not had a drop of rain for 14 straight weeks. The city is also wooden. Some of our streets and sidewalks were even made of wood. The river back then was so polluted and oily, parts of the river itself were flammable. And to top it all off, on today, October 8, 1871, we have wind of up to 30 miles an hour. This is a bad combination. When about 4 blocks to the right, or to the southwest of where we are right now, a fire breaks out at Miss Catherine O'Leary's barn. Quickly gets across the river and burns through 4 miles of the city north. Let's jump ahead about 30 hours to when the fire finally burns out. It has destroyed around 18,000 buildings. More than 100,000 people lost their homes. More than 300 people lost their lives. One of the biggest urban fires ever. Now, people want answers. Rumors are going around because we know where the fire started, but we don't know how. The most popular rumor you find in a newspaper. They say there was a cow in the barn, kicked over a lantern, and and started the fire. Which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Chicago was the meatpacking capital of the world. Maybe some cow finally got grass, fed up, decided to take matters into her own hooves and settle her beef once and for all. Yeah, I know the cow jokes are cheesy. I'll try not to milk it. Your groans are just as good as laughs to me. I'd say on the whole, these work about 2% of the time, so, well, it's half and half. All right, let's skim ahead. There was 7, if you're counting. We rebuild quickly. Bayfront, Chicago's called the second city. That's because the first one burned down. It's basically our second attempt at building Chicago. We rebuild so quickly that barely 20 years later, we win a bid to host the World's Fair of 1893. That's your third star on the Chicago flag, the fair. It was a huge deal. At the time, the population of Chicago was around 1 million. That fair had 27 million visitors who saw things they had never seen before, including zippers. Were introduced at that World's Fair. Spray paint, chocolate brownies. The most impressive part was a campus down by the lake called the White City. 12 massive buildings built by an all-star team of American architects. If I actually had a time machine, that would be one of my first stops. I really wish I could have seen it. One of those buildings still stands today. It's now the Museum of Science and Industry. The whole fair was overseen by an architect named Daniel Burnham. He did such a good job, they said, okay, Daniel, plan Chicago. So in the year 1909, we have the Burnham Plan. It's a plan for the whole city, and its effects are still being felt today. Remember the Riverwalk and the Lakefront, both features of the Burnham Plan. Even the way our city grid is laid out. In other cities, you might see trash out in front of the buildings. We have alleys behind most of our buildings, even in the neighborhoods, for the removal of trash. It's another feature of the Burnham Plan. Years later, we would host another World's Fair. That's your 4th star on the Chicago flag, the other fair. This one was impressive for a couple of reasons. First of all, the fact we got to host a second World's Fair. And also, this was in 1933, which is right in the middle of the Great Depression. It was still so successful and profitable, they were in it for a second consecutive summer. Years later, in 1956, the city of Chicago announced the location for the Chicago Fire Academy, where to this day, Chicago trains firefighters. And the location they chose is also the exact former location of Miss Catherine O'Leary's barn. Fire began where we accused a cow of arson. So it's about time for another U-turn break. Visit the bar, visit the bathroom. My name is Michael. If you have any questions, one question that I get a lot is, what is that ahead of the right with the 2 big smokestacks? That's an old steam plant from the 1930s. Used to run on coal, then it ran on natural gas. They shut it down in 2011. It's kind of fallen apart, so they want to tear it down, but it's in a tricky spot to do so because there's trains that run right behind it, and those trains don't want to stop running to let them tear it down. So it's kind of in limbo. This is one of our more endangered historic buildings. For now, as we turn, you can enjoy looking at one of our old power plants from the 1930s. My name is Michael. If you have any other questions, I'll be back on the mic after we turn around. How's it going? Everybody doing okay? Cultural futures. If you're buying or selling stocks in various crops and livestock, all that stock trading happened right there in the Chicago Board of Trade, another Art Deco building. In the foreground, see that black rectangle with all the great balconies that kind of look like filing cabinets? That's 235 West Van Buren from 2017, and actually what they were going for is they wanted those great balconies to imitate traffic on the road below when viewed from above. You see how the short balconies look like cars? The long ones look like semi-trucks? The whole thing kind of looks like an impossible game of Frogger. And now, the king, the Willis, formerly Sears Tower, the black skyscraper straight ahead, is the tallest building in Chicago. And when it was completed in 1974, it was the tallest building in the world. Held that title for 24 years until 1998. How tall is it? 1,451 feet, or 442 meters, 110 floors. Still the tallest building in Chicago today. It is the 3rd tallest building in the United States. The tallest building in America today is the One World Trade Center in New York. However, if you were to put that building side by side with the Willis Tower, roof to roof, the Willis Tower is 83 feet taller. However, you see the antenna on top of Willis Tower? Those communication antennae are not considered structural, so they do not count towards the height. Whereas the One World Trade Center in New York has a very tall spire that does count towards the height, so they got us on a technicality. Well played, New York. Take a mental image of those antennae you see on top of the Willis Tower. In just a couple minutes, I'll give you a frame of reference for just how tall those antennae are. A communication antenna for radio, cell phone tower, that kind of thing. Now, when you're the tallest building in the Windy City, you have to deal with a lot of wind. On a very windy day, the top of the Willis Tower can sway up to 18 inches in any direction. Here's what we talk about our 3rd method of sway reduction. The Willis Tower uses a method called bundled columns. Look at the shape of the Willis Tower. It's essentially 9 towers or columns grouped together. As you work your way up the building, fewer and fewer of those columns continue. Only 2 of the columns go to the building's full height. That way they can lean together and resist the wind from any direction. The story behind this design, the building's lead architect and chief engineer Fazler Khan were sitting around at dinner one night in the 1970s, and there were cigarettes on the table. They realized if you stacked them end to end, they were weaker, but if you bundled them together at the base, they were stronger. That's how you get the Sears Tower, a building based on cigarettes. Let's talk about the name. I've called it the Sears Tower, I've called it the Willis Tower. It was originally built as the Sears Tower. It had that name for many years until the lease on the naming rights expired around the time of the '08 crash and was won by Willis, an insurance brokerage company that occupies 3 floors of the building today. Most Chicago locals still call it the Sears Tower out of nostalgia. I call it the Sears Tower because I'm not from here and I'm just trying to fit in. Did you know 2 people have actually climbed the Sears Tower? The first was in 1981. A local man named Dan Goodwin climbed it with suction cups while wearing a homemade Spider-Man costume. Imagine looking out of your office window seeing that. The second person to climb the Sears Tower was in 1999, a Frenchman named Alain Robert. He climbed the Sears Tower in 1 hour and 20 minutes with no equipment.
Oh my God.
No ropes, no nothing. He just wedged his hands into the window frames and free climbed the whole thing. And he survived, and he's gone on to climb many of the other tallest buildings, including the Burj Khalifa. He did get arrested, though. You can't do that. If you would like to visit the top of the Willis Tower, might I recommend the elevators. You can buy tickets, it's like $35 for adults, included in City Pass if you got that. If you look way up near the top, you'll see 5 glass boxes poking out of the side. You might even see people moving around in there. That's called the ledge. It's part of the observation deck. If you want to, you can walk out into one of those glass boxes, look straight down between your feet through that glass floor, over 1,000 feet straight down. See the full height through the gap to your right. They say, on a clear day from the top of the Willis Tower, you can actually see 4 states: Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Now, obviously, you can't see exactly where those state borders are, so I'll help you out. If you see corn, that's Indiana. If you see a cow, that's Wisconsin. If you see someone drinking a craft beer and resenting Ohio for no reason, that's Michigan. It's pretty regional, but it worked. Now remember earlier I told you to take a mental image of those antennae we saw on top of the Willis Tower. Those antennae might not have looked that tall. It's really just because they're so far away. You know, they're over 1,000 feet on the ground. It's a matter